Set blasters on full.
What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to check out the Iron Man Mark 46 action figure from SH Figuarts, and hopefully this will erase the bad taste in my mouth from the Mafex C-3PO that I reviewed last. And as always, let's start off by checking out the packaging. And as usual, Figuarts does a pretty good job with packaging. It's very similar to the Captain America packaging I reviewed previously. The only difference here is a red background as opposed to the blue with the Captain America figure. You've got the nice big window with the figure and accessories, and all the graphics are the same as they were on the Captain America box. Side of the box has a nice close-up picture of the figure, as well as a little write-up on SH Figuarts up top. And on the back of the box, we've got some additional pictures of the figure and some various poses. And on the other side of the box, we've got the name of the figure, Iron Man Mark 46, in some large lettering. So now we'll take a look at the accessories, and we'll start with the jet effects for the feet. And these are a translucent orange plastic, nicely sculpted, and they have some nice white paint added on the top there for the smoke. You also get a pair of jet effects for the hands. These are pretty much the same as the ones for the feet. The only difference is they have a hole instead of a peg. You also get a pair of repulsor beams for the hands, and again, these are well sculpted and painted with a nice little touch of white towards the base of the beam. Moving on to the hands, you get a total of 4 sets of hands with this figure, and these are the fists that come mounted on them. As you can see, everything is well sculpted and well painted. There's really no issues with the paint or sculpt on these, which is nice. You also have a pair of open hands with pegs so you can mount the effects on them, and these actually attach to the wrists at an angle so you can have that hand upright for shooting the repulsor beam, unlike this pair, which is pretty much the same without the pegs, although these mount straight on the wrist and you really can't get that much of a bend on them. And you also have a pair of flat outstretched hands, and again, these mount straight on so you cannot get these to bend that far, so it's pretty much just for flying poses. So now I'll take a look at the figure itself, and we will start with the sculpt and paint on it, and I think Figuarts did a great job on this. I really like the colors they chose. The red is a really nice, deep, rich red, very glossy. The silver is a bit of a matte color, and it contrasts nicely with the glossy red. And the gold on this is very rich gold, very vibrant, much more so than they had on the Mark 45. Really no issues with the paint. Everything's pretty clean and precise. There's a small amount of bleed here or there, but really nothing to write home about. Sculpt on here is also really well done. Lots of nice little details. They have these rivets sculpted in with just a little line of blue in the middle. It looks really nice. Great details all over the back here, as you can see. Really nicely done. Side of it is also really good. That side torso area is great. Some of that gold area there is actually sculpted on, not just painted on. I also like that all the joints are sculpted and painted, so there's just no flat plastic hanging out there while you're posing the figure. Not something new for Figuarts, but it is a detail I appreciate. It's also worth noting that the elbows, knees, and feet on this figure are die cast, and the bottom of the feet do have treads sculpted into them. So now I'll take a look at the articulation on the figure, and you can get the head to look up quite a decent amount. You do have a bit of a gap there, but it's mostly for flying poses anyway. You also have a bit of a gap when you look down, but with the head and neck both articulated, you do have quite a range of motion. You can also get a pretty good tilt on the head, which is always nice for expressive poses, and you do have full rotation of the head. The neck also rotates a bit, but it's a little hard to isolate it. Shoulder pads are on a hinge, and you can get those pretty high up, which helps with the arm articulation. Shoulders are typical Figuarts shoulders. You have plenty of movement inside the socket itself, which is nice. You have rotation at the bicep, and you have some really nice double jointed elbows. You can get quite a bend on those, which is always a nice feature. And again, those are die cast joints. There is no rotation at the elbow or forearm, but you do have standard ball socket wrists, so you can rotate those completely around, and you do have a decent range of motion up and down. You also have a diaphragm joint. You can get a pretty good amount of pivot left and right on that. You also have some rotation, although it's not full rotation. And you do have a little bit of pivot back and forward. Not a huge amount. You are hitting the armor on the torso there, but you do have a good amount of movement in the waist as well. You can definitely get some decent movement forward and backward at the waist. And when you add the two joints in, you can get a really nice bend forward and bend back. You also have a good amount of pivot left and right, and you do have rotation at the waist as well. This figure also has some really nice hip joints. You can see you can get pretty much a full split on these. It's basically a ball joint on a hinge. Everything feels really solid, moves really well. You can pull that whole leg out from the socket and get some great movement out of it. You do have rotation at the thigh, as well as the hip itself will rotate a bit. and you have some nice double jointed die cast knees. You can get a really good bend on those. The ankles are probably the most limited joint on the figure. You can get a little bit of movement up and down. It's not a huge amount, unfortunately. You are a little limited with the armor rubbing against each other. Same thing with rotation. You do have it, but you just have to make sure the armor's out of the way. And you do have pivot. It's a really stiff joint. It's a decent amount of pivot. It's not a huge amount, but you can still get some great poses out of it. The feet, again, are die cast, and the toes are articulated, as well as that little armor flap there is on a hinge, so you can move that up and down, get it out of the way so you can kind of position the toes where you want them. So now let's check out the size and scale of the figure, and this figure stands at pretty much exactly 6 1/8 inches tall. And here's the Figuarts Mark 46 in the middle, with the Figuarts Mark 45 on the left, and the Marvel Legends Mark 43 on the right. And as you can see here, the Mark 45 is just a hair taller than the Mark 46. You can also see the differences in proportion. The Mark 45 is a little bit more of a sleeker style suit, whereas the Mark 46 is a little bit beefier, especially in the shoulder and torso areas. It's also slightly more angular than the Mark 45. So overall, I think Figuarts did a fantastic job with this figure. I have zero complaints about it. The paint on it was practically perfect. Like I said, there was a little bit of bleeding here or there, but other than that, absolutely perfect. I really like the colors they used on here. I really like the gloss on the red. I also had zero issues with the sculpt and mold on here. I've had some of the recent Figuarts figures where there was definitely some molding issues that happened. This is completely perfect, no issues with the molding. This figure also has a really nice weight to it thanks to the die-cast joints in it. And speaking of joints, I had zero issues with the joints on this figure. I've been having some issues with loose joints in some of the Figuarts recently, but every joint on this thing felt great. The bottom of the elbow joints were maybe a little bit looser than the rest of the joints, but I still wouldn't call it a loose joint by any means. I did notice that there was a little bit more of a gap in some of the joints than you see in like the Mark 45, but it did add to the articulation of the figure, so I really can't complain about that. And you get a fairly standard set of accessories with this figure, with the 4 sets of hands, the repulsor beams, and the 4 jet effects. So again, just a great figure. I have zero complaints about it, and I highly recommend it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the review, and as always, thanks for watching, and subscribe for more.